Farmers in Japan have used a secret seed ball technique for centuries to reclaim desert-like land. And today, we're bringing it straight to your backyard. But here's what nobody tells you when you buy that bag of fertilizer at the garden center. Your soil isn't failing because it's weak. It's failing because you've been fighting it. Every tiller pass, every synthetic nitrogen dump, every weed and feed cocktail you've poured into the ground, it hasn't been fixing your soil. It's been quietly destroying the one thing that makes soil alive in the first place. And the result? You look out at cracked, gray, compacted earth and wonder why nothing grows the way it should. Why your tomatoes are small. Why your squash rots before it sets. Why no matter how much you add, the ground just seems to take it and give back less every single year. What if the problem isn't what you're adding, but what you've been taking away? Today, we're going deep on one of the most underestimated growing methods in the world. No chemicals. No tilling, no expensive equipment. Just a small ball of clay, compost, and seeds. And a biological chain reaction that can genuinely transform barren, exhausted ground into a productive, living ecosystem within a single growing season. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to completely rethink how you see your soil. The cost of dead soil. Let's start with what's actually happening beneath your feet, because most gardeners never think about this layer. Healthy topsoil, the kind that produces real abundance, isn't just dirt, it's a civilization. 1 teaspoon of healthy soil contains more living organisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, arthropods. Billions of interactions happening at a microscopic level, all of them moving nutrients, breaking down organic matter, and essentially feeding your plants from the ground up. Now here's what modern farming did to that civilization. Starting in the mid-20th century, large-scale agriculture shifted almost entirely to a model built on synthetic inputs and mechanical disruption. Till the soil to break compaction, pour on nitrogen fertilizer to force growth, spray herbicides to clear competition. Rinse and repeat, season after season. And in the short term, it worked. Yields shot up. Fields looked cleaner. It seemed like progress. But what was happening underground told a completely different story. Every time a tiller blade cuts through the soil, it shreds the hyphal threads of mycorrhizal fungi, the white, thread-like networks that connect plant roots across entire ecosystems. These fungal networks are not a minor feature of soil biology. They are the internet of the underground world. They carry phosphorus, water, and chemical signals between plants. They extend a plant's root reach by up to 700 times. Destroy them, and a plant is essentially cut off from the grid. It's forced to survive on whatever nutrients it can reach with its own roots, which, compared to a connected fungal network, is almost nothing. And synthetic fertilizers? They don't rebuild this. They bypass it. They give the plant a short hit of available nitrogen or phosphorus directly through the root, and over time, the plant stops investing in the fungal relationship altogether. The fungi die off. The bacteria lose their food source. The soil compacts harder each year, because nothing is living in it to create structure. You end up with what soil scientists call dirt, a growing medium that is technically present but biologically dead. By 2026, this collapse has hit a critical point. The USDA has estimated that the United States loses roughly 2 billion tons of topsoil every single year to erosion and degradation. In parts of the Midwest, what used to be 2 feet of rich black topsoil has been reduced to 3 or 4 inches, and a growing number of researchers, regenerative farmers, and soil ecologists are arriving at the same conclusion. The conventional model has run its course. The shift happening right now, the one they're calling regenerative agriculture or lazy farming, is built on a completely different premise. Stop fighting the soil. Stop breaking it open. Give it back its biology, and it will rebuild itself with almost no help from you. That idea is not new. In fact, it's about as old as farming gets. The science of the clay ball. In 1938, a Japanese microbiologist named Masanobu Fukuoka walked away from his career in science, back to his family's citrus farm in Iyo, Ehime Prefecture. He spent the next several decades doing something that baffled his neighbors. Almost nothing. He didn't plow. He didn't weed in the conventional sense. He didn't apply chemical fertilizers. What he did do, and what eventually made him one of the most influential agricultural thinkers of the 20th century, was observe. He watched how undisturbed land regenerated itself after a disturbance. He watched how seeds moved through an ecosystem. And he developed a practice he called Nendo Dango, which translates loosely as clay dumpling, or what most English-speaking growers now call the seed ball. The concept is deceptively simple. You take seeds, a diverse mix suited to your region and your goals, and you encase them in a precisely prepared shell of red clay and aged compost. Usually the ratio runs roughly 3 parts clay to 1 part mature compost by volume, with the seeds mixed evenly throughout. You roll them by hand into balls roughly the size of a large marble or a small grape. Then you let them dry in the shade for a day or two, and you scatter them across your target area. That's it. But what happens next is where the actual science lives, and it's worth understanding at a real level because this isn't folk magic, it's biology. The clay shell does several things simultaneously. First, it physically protects the seeds. Birds, rodents, and insects that would normally pick seeds off bare soil surface can't easily access them inside a hardened clay matrix. In Fukuoka's field tests on degraded land, seed ball germination rates consistently outperformed direct broadcasting of bare seeds because the protection factor was so much higher. The clay doesn't just shield from predators either. It moderates temperature extremes, keeping the seeds viable through heat spikes that would desiccate exposed seeds on the surface. Second, and this is the part that really matters, the aged compost packed inside the clay ball is not just a food source. It's a microbial starter culture. Mature compost, the real stuff, the kind that's been hot composted for at least 60 days and then allowed to cure, contains enormous populations of beneficial bacteria and fungi, including the early-stage mycorrhizal species that will colonize plant roots. When rain or irrigation moisture penetrates the clay shell and triggers germination, those microbial populations don't just sit there. They explode outward with the emerging root tip. The seedling doesn't arrive in dead soil and struggle to find biology. It arrives carrying its own biology with it, primed and active, and it begins colonizing the surrounding soil from day one. Researchers studying this process have called it microbial priming. Essentially, you're giving the seedling a biological head start that bare root transplants and broadcast seeds simply cannot match. The seed mix itself matters too. Fukuoka was adamant that monoculture, planting only one species, is an artificial, fragile arrangement that nature never produces. His seed balls typically combine nitrogen-fixing legumes like clover or vetch with deep taproot species like daikon radish or wild mustard, along with the food crops themselves, and sometimes a fast-establishing nurse plant that would provide early ground cover. Each species plays a role in what becomes a self-organizing polyculture, and we'll come back to that in a moment. The clay ratio, for the record, isn't arbitrary. Too little clay, and the ball falls apart before the seeds are protected long enough. Too much clay, and the shell becomes so dense that moisture penetration is slow and uneven, delaying germination unpredictably. The 3-to-1 ratio is a field-tested balance point that Fukuoka refined over decades of experimentation. Some practitioners adjust it slightly based on local clay type. Dense, iron-rich red clay can handle a slightly leaner mix. Lighter clays may need to run a bit richer in compost. But the baseline is proven, the no-till deployment strategy. Here's where most people make a mistake when they first hear about this method. They assume that because you're adding seeds, you need to prepare the ground first. Loosen it up. Maybe break the crust. Work in some amendments. Do none of that. The entire point of the clay ball method, the reason Fukuoka called his approach do-nothing farming, not because it's effortless, but because it avoids destructive intervention, is that you are not preparing the soil. You are trusting the seeds to prepare it. And they will, but only if you don't destroy the soil structure before they get the chance. The deployment strategy is straightforward. Walk your plot or field and simply throw the balls. Fukuoka called this broadcasting, and the image most people have is of a farmer walking through a field, tossing seed balls the way you'd scatter feed for chickens. That's pretty accurate. You're not placing them precisely. You're not spacing them out. You're distributing them across the area with enough density that you'll get good coverage after accounting for balls that roll into low spots, get moved by animals, or simply don't germinate. On degraded land, Fukuoka often broadcast at rates as high as several pounds of seed balls per acre in his initial restoration passes. The redundancy is intentional. You're not expecting every ball to germinate, and you don't need every ball to germinate. Now, about timing. This is critical. Moisture is the trigger. A seed ball sitting on dry, sun-baked ground in summer is dormant and protected. That's fine. It will wait. But you want that germination trigger to come at the right moment in your climate. For most temperate regions, the ideal broadcast window is late autumn, just before the rainy season begins. The balls sit through winter, stratifying the seeds naturally, and then when spring rains hit, germination happens in a massive synchronized wave. In subtropical or arid climates, timing shifts to just before monsoon season or the early rainy period. Mycorrhizal fungi are the biggest reason timing matters this much. These networks develop fastest in moist, undisturbed soil. If you broadcast into wet ground and then the soil dries hard and cracks, you can lose the developing fungal threads before they establish. The goal is to time your broadcast so that germination happens and the seedlings can establish root systems into soil that stays reasonably moist for the first 4 to 6 weeks. After that, a well-seeded polyculture begins to create its own moisture retention through ground cover, and the system largely takes care of itself. One more thing on deployment. Slopes and erosion-prone areas are actually ideal candidates for seed ball broadcasting. The clay shell is heavy enough to lodge in shallow surface depressions rather than rolling away, and the deep taproot species in the seed mix will knit the soil together within a single season. Fukuoka used this method extensively on hillsides in Japan that had been left bare by clear cutting, and the results, documented in his 1978 book The One Straw Revolution, were dramatic. The biological chain reaction. Once germination begins, something happens that is genuinely remarkable to watch, especially if you've been looking at barren, hard-packed ground for years. The first visible change comes from the surface. Ground cover spreads fast. The nitrogen-fixing legumes in the seed mix, your clovers, vetches, and field peas, establish quickly and begin the process of pulling atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil through their root nodules. This happens without any input from you. The bacteria responsible, mostly Rhizobium species, are already present in your compost and in the surrounding soil. Give them living legume roots and they colonize immediately. Simultaneously, the deep taproot species, daikon radish is the most famous example, sometimes called the tillage radish for exactly this reason, drive downward through the compacted layers. A mature daikon root can penetrate 12 to 18 inches into compacted clay soil that a garden fork would struggle to break. When that root eventually dies and decays, it leaves behind a vertical channel lined with organic matter. Water drains through it. Air follows. Earthworms, which cannot survive in compacted, oxygen-depleted soil, start moving in. Their castings, essentially concentrated microbial life wrapped in a mineral matrix, build soil structure faster than almost any other natural process. Carbon starts moving into the ground. This is the part that soil scientists get genuinely excited about because it's not just about plant growth, it's about the long-term health and water retention of the entire bed. Living root systems and decaying organic matter from plant dieback feed the soil food web continuously. Fungal threads build aggregates, clumps of soil particles bound together by microbial glues, and those aggregates hold water in a way that bare, compacted soil simply cannot. Studies on established polyculture plots have documented water infiltration rates 6 to 10 times higher than adjacent conventionally tilled plots. The visible evidence accumulates month by month. Soil that started gray and dusty darkens as organic matter levels rise. The surface stays moist longer after rain. Earthworm castings appear, and the plant diversity creates a layered canopy that suppresses weeds not through herbicide, but through competition. A dense, established polyculture leaves no light or space for aggressive weeds to gain traction. By the second year on most restoration plots, the soil profile has changed measurably. By the third year, you often have productive ground where previously nothing would grow reliably. Exponential harvest and scaling. So what does this translate to in actual yield? Fukuoka's own fields in Ehime consistently produced rice and winter grain yields that matched or exceeded the output of neighboring conventional farms, without synthetic fertilizer, without tillage, and with far less labor. His comparison data, compiled over more than 30 years, showed that his no-input polyculture system sustained yields that commercial agriculture could only match by investing heavily in external inputs every single season. More recent trials have supported the same pattern. When researchers compare polyculture no-till plots using seedball establishment against conventional high-input monoculture plots over multi-year periods, the polyculture plots show increasing yields over time as soil health builds, while conventional plots show declining yields as soil biology degrades and input costs rise. The harvest model is also different, and it's worth understanding before you expect the same experience you'd get from a row-crop vegetable garden. A polyculture established through seed balls doesn't produce one massive harvest of one crop at one time. It produces a succession. Early nitrogen fixers establish. Root crops mature mid-season. Later food crops ripen into autumn. If you've built a well-designed mix for your climate, something in the plot is productive in nearly every month of the growing season, which, from a caloric and nutritional standpoint, is actually more valuable than a single large harvest of one vegetable. Harvest from these systems means walking the plot regularly rather than scheduling one big pick day. You pull what's ready. You leave what isn't. You let some plants go fully to seed rather than harvesting everything. And this is the key to year 2. Seed saving from your strongest, most resilient performers closes the loop on the entire system. Every season, the plants that germinated best in your specific soil survived your specific weather patterns and produced most abundantly under your specific conditions are the ones you let go to seed. Over 2 or 3 seasons, your saved seed population becomes hyper-adapted to your land in a way that no commercial seed packet ever can be. You are essentially doing what farmers did for 10,000 years before the industrial seed market existed, selecting for your place. Scale comes naturally from that process. Once you have saved seed, you make more balls. More balls cover more ground. The established plots from year 1 have built soil biology that accelerates establishment in year 2. Each season, the system requires less intervention and produces more. That's not a sales pitch. That's what compound soil health looks like when you stop destroying it every spring with a tiller blade. The clay ball method is not a shortcut. It's a reorientation. Instead of forcing the ground to produce through inputs and mechanical disruption, you're creating conditions for the ground to produce naturally, the way it did before we decided to fight it. Fukuoka spent 50 years trying to show the world that the most radical thing a farmer could do was stop. Stop tilling. Stop poisoning. Stop assuming that intervention equals progress. And plot by plot, season by season, the biology proved him right. Your soil isn't dead, it's waiting. Give it a handful of clay balls and a little time, and it will show you what it's actually capable of.